Hello and welcome to this episode of the Law of Positivism podcast. I am so grateful to my beloved sister Shireen Oberg for inviting me to guest host this episode. I'm Annabel Boulay. I'm an author, speaker, therapist, mystic, and academic authority on the Western mystery tradition of women's spirituality. So I've spent the last 30 years specialising in peeling back the layers of patriarchal religious appropriation and manipulation of ancient pagan mythology, ostensibly in order to control women in society. And I feel it is my sole mission to restore those true teachings for the healing and empowerment of women. So today I'm going to be speaking to you about the Rose Lineage, which I specialise in, and the myth of Sophia, Black Goddess of Wisdom, and Magdalene as her human embodiment. And then I'm going to be exploring the cross of the sleeping phoenix, which is this huge global shift that is happening energetically in 2027, when in human design we'll be moving from the cross of planning to the cross of the sleeping phoenix. And as a specialist in Sophia-Magdalene, I deeply believe that the energies of this cross of the sleeping phoenix are embodied in the alchemy of Sophia-Magdalene. So I don't feel there's any coincidence that there is this current uprising throughout the world of fascination in Sophia, in Magdalene, in the Rose Lineage, at the same time as the world is beginning to move into this cross of the sleeping phoenix. So I'm going to spend some time teaching you about the four gates of the cross of the sleeping phoenix and helping you to work with their energies and showing you how the teachings of these gates are really embodied in the mythos of Sophia-Magdalene and of the Rose Lineage. So just to begin with, I wanted to share some of my own story with Sophia-Magdalene. I studied Sophia as Black Goddess of Wisdom during my master's and PhD back in the 1990s, when very few people were interested in this topic, and my research rested on the very large shoulders of the few goddess theologians and feminist theologians who had published books on the subject before then. But it wasn't until I was in labour with my eldest daughter, who I actually named Sophia Mary, that I had a tangible, lived, embodied experience of Sophia as Black Goddess of Wisdom. And I had just reached that point in labour, as many women do, when I really felt like I didn't have the energy to go on. And I remember closing my eyes and saying to myself, I've got the energy for 5 more pushes and then that's it. I'm closing my eyes and dying. And with the next contraction, I had the most powerful out-of-body experience. I literally watched my soul leave my body and walk into the cave of the Black Goddess. And she was seated there on her throne in front of her fire. And she said to me, "Come, brave warrior." And I sat on her lap and she cradled me like a babe myself as this great mother. And each time that a contraction came and my soul left my body and was cradled by her, I could feel no pain. So that was my first deeply embodied initiation with her. And little did I know what was about to unfold over the next few years. So my daughter was born with a life-threatening syndrome and required immediate life-saving open chest surgery when she was a day old. And then I had to nurse her through a further, 11 operations in the end. And through those years, she guided me on this repeated Sophianic descent and ascent of the soul until we literally became the living embodiment of the Gnostic myth of Sophia. So this myth teaches us that darkness is not separate from light, that it is within the darkest times of our lives that we find the light, her light, that guides us to our rebirth back into the light of greater wisdom, love, compassion, strength, and courage. So I wove these experiences into the writing of my historical witch burnings novel, The Serpent's Tale, which I published in 2009, having had the joyful and very healing experience of birthing my second healthy daughter, Jasmine. And when I published The Serpent's Tale, I was 6 months pregnant with my son. I had just been remarried. I was full of hope and light and faith. And I felt quite naively that we had come to the end of our journey of being challenged, and that I now could trust in having been reborn back into that place of light. And then 3 months later, my son Zach was born. And despite extensive prenatal screening, he was born with another rare but different life-threatening syndrome, with facial and oral paralysis that rendered him unable to breathe, feed, speak, or smile. And after 5 months of fighting for his life in intensive care, we were then charged with intensively nursing him at home, including resuscitating him several times a day under emergency conditions for months. So I spent that first year after Zach's birth really running on adrenaline, trying to keep him alive. But when his airway had stabilized somewhat and I had more space for my shadow emotions to arise, I really went on a profound journey with my holy rage at the seeming injustice, at my disbelief that this could happen again. And I went through a period of experiencing a complete loss of faith. And I lost all sense of compassion. I could not feel compassion for anyone else other than parents of children who had died. And I didn't recognize myself. I was so angry with Goddess, so angry with Sophia. I swore that I would never be her priestess again. I just felt enraged that she would do this to me and make my children suffer. But as I began to paint my Healing Womb art installation, and I painted 4 large paintings of the Mother of Loss, the Mother of Solitude, the Mother of Healing, and the Mother of Compassion, I literally began to paint my way through rage and grief, and then through those feelings of intense aloneness that we can experience when we're suffering a dark night of the soul, even if we're surrounded by loved ones comforting us. Ultimately, we have to walk that journey alone in the wilderness, and that's when I feel we really experience Lilith. And she empowers us to find our strength and courage deep within us in order to be able to start the return, the ascent, the rebirth. And then I painted Bridget, goddess of healing, goddess of children, but also Lady Alchemia. Bridget is the Rose Celtic goddess who embodies the same archetypal energy as Sophia, Black Goddess of Wisdom, in their role as Lady Alchemia. And this is the alchemy that we find in this cross of the sleeping phoenix. And my incarnation cross or soul imprint in human design is the sleeping phoenix. I literally embody this alchemist. And it is through the journey that Sophia-Magdalene have led me on, those repeated dark nights of the soul and rebirths back into the light, that have empowered me to embody this alchemical ability to repeatedly transform and rebirth myself out of the darkness into the light. And I feel that that's what we are all deeply being called to do. You've no doubt experienced your own dark nights of the soul, your stories of survival. And I feel so deeply that they have all been in preparation for this time. Because if you are on a spiritual path and if you are drawn or interested in the Gnostic path or the Rose Lineage or the mythos of Sophia-Magdalene, then I really feel that you are being called to harness your courage, your strength from those stories of survival, from those dark nights of the soul, to alchemize and transform them, to elicit the soul gifts, your gnosis, your wisdom, your lived experience from them, and then use that for the good of all, to light the way for others, to be that force of light against the forces of darkness, of patriarchy that we see in the world today. I really believe that the patriarchy is in its final death throes, and that is why it's rising up even more powerfully to try to exert control over the populace and especially over women. And it is up to us and the healthy men who support us to rise up in defiance, to harness our inner strength and confidence and courage, and to light the way, perhaps for other women who are potentially more vulnerable. So this journey that Sophia-Magdalene led me on took me to places of such annihilation where I was literally ground into ashes and had to remember myself, literally put myself back together, gather all the fragmented parts of my soul and rebuild myself. But once I had done that, I was able to see that I hadn't been punished, that Goddess Sophia-Magdalene hadn't been doing these things to me. They had been the ones who had been holding me through it all. And that on some deep soul level, I had chosen that journey and my children had chosen their journey, so that we could go to those edge places and live on that bridge between life and death and come back bearing our torches to light the way for others across the bridge. And so now I feel very deeply that it is my soul mission to be that embodiment of the sleeping phoenix rising, to open the gateways for other women to step through and to really walk that path of priestess, of Sophia-Magdalene, of Lady Alchemia. And so much of my journey with Sophia-Magdalene has been about working with shame. I teach very deeply in my Avalon Rose Priestess training around this concept of the prostitute and Magdalene. In the ancient Gnostic myth of Sophia, she is described as a prostitute, as destitute. But this, of course, is a metaphor for the soul's journey. The soul descends from the Garden of Eden, from the pleroma, or what I term the rose garden in my teachings, and descends into the incarnation, the life path, the earth walk, which at first is seen as a deep sleep, as a loss of consciousness, in the sense that it's a loss of being awake, of the soul being awake in conscious communion with Source. And it is our soul's journey, just like Sleeping Beauty, the later patriarchal distortion in that fairy tale, to reawaken to our soul, to our soul's purpose, in communion with Source. So this concept of the prostitute is, of course, a metaphor, but the patriarchal religion, the church, of course, manipulated it and projected this idea of the prostitute, of the whore, onto Magdalene, the destitute woman who needed saving. And of course, like I just mentioned with Sleeping Beauty, this was then transferred into the fairy tales, so that we were painted as damsels in distress who lay there inept, asleep, waiting for our hero, our prince, to come and awaken us. And of course, this is not truth. The real truth within these stories is that we hold the power within each of us, within our own inner sacred marriage. So Sleeping Beauty is our anima, our soul, resting, sleeping. Prince Charming is our animus, that part of us that is our conscious self, our ego, who must journey through many trials and tribulations of life's challenges into our unconscious, our right brain, to come into communion with our unconscious, with our soul, with our anima, with all our creative inspirations, our soul gifts, our gnosis, our wisdom, and then bring all those gifts and gnosis and manifest them in the world. So this is about the awakening of our true self, the awakening of our soul, and the manifestation of our soul purpose, our soul mission in the world. And if your soul has contracted to incarnate at this time on this path, it is for a very important reason. And each of us has that unique soul mission. But I think it's also important that we come together as councils of women, supported by healthy men, because together we do rise stronger. So there is this invitation within the cross of the sleeping phoenix for autonomy. It's about a return to the individual, a return to your own truth, to your own power, to your own energy, to your own authentic voice. And then from that place of autonomy, to then enter into authentic relationships with others, so that we can rise together, and together we can empower others to rise with us. So I'd love to just take you through those 4 gates now and just explain how they weave with this mythos of the rose of Sophia-Magdalene, but also to just share some questions that you could be asking yourself so that you can start to work with these gates as well in your life. So the first gate is the gate of spirit, emotional freedom and abundance, through faith and trust in oneself, not through dependence on external organizations or people. So this gate really invites you to stop outsourcing your power to others and instead to liberate your own innate creative and abundant spirit. So this is the path of Gnosis. This is what the early Christian Gnostics taught. It was only the patriarchal church that insisted that you needed an intermediary, a priest, between you and God. But the early Christian Gnostics and all the mystics and the pagan tradition upon which their teachings were founded teaches the path of Gnosis, of self-knowledge, of wisdom that comes through lived, embodied experience. The path of individuation that Jung later describes about the gathering of the fragmented parts of the self within the unconscious, the healing of the shadow self, of those parts that we've exiled and denied, and the gathering of the psyche into wholeness. So this is the path of Gnosis and the path of individuation. Because when we do this, that is when we truly liberate our soul, our spirit. We come home to ourselves, or in my work, I call it coming home to the rose garden, the return to the rose garden. And this is our quest. And so this first gate of the sleeping phoenix is a powerful invitation to come home to yourself, to rely on yourself. And through that autonomy and that independence, to liberate your creative self, your divine magical child self, that aspect of soul that is your pure essence, that is your soul imprint, who embodies all those innate soul gifts and creative inspirations. So I, on a practical level, thinking about this on a sort of human, egoic, everyday level, stepped through this gate back in 2008. I was a young single mother at the time. I had been working for a mental health charity. I had loved my job, but I had reached a point where I was beginning to feel really frustrated and bored and resentful, and I started to dread going into work. And it wasn't the work per se, and I loved the people I worked with, my team and our service users. But my soul was becoming bored and frustrated. And for me, I always have to feel that sense of boredom and frustration, because that is the first signal to me that my soul needs me to make a change. Because the one thing that is certain in life is change and transformation. And we need to be constantly changing and evolving on our path in order to grow. So I listened to my soul. I took a massive leap of faith, because the second stage of this process of release and transformation and rebirth is always fear and resistance. As soon as you have that spark of initiation, of the realization that you're going to have to make a change, you will immediately be met by a wall of fear and resistance from your ego that is going to tell you to stay where you are, because that is what feels safe, because that's what's known, even if it's suffocating you. And then I have to recognize that fear and resistance, work with those typically younger, smaller, more vulnerable parts of me, breathe through that fear, transform that fear, alchemize it, and then take a leap of faith and literally jump off the precipice. It's a bit like the fool in the tarot, you know? You just have to step off the precipice, metaphorically. And the only way you can do that is by having complete trust and faith. You have to trust yourself that you will survive, that you have what it takes. You have to trust in your soul's journey because you are trusting your soul. Your soul is signaling to you that it's time to change, and you have to trust in that. And you have to trust in source, whatever energy you believe in, be it fate, the universe, goddess. You have to trust that you are being supported by the invisible, by spirit at all times, and that everything does flow in divine time. You always end up eventually where you're meant to be. And so I took the leap of faith, I resigned, and I became a self-employed therapist and workshop facilitator. And there were so many times in my mothering journey as a single mother, nursing my children, that I did not know where the money was going to come the next month to pay my bills. But something always happened. I would go to an event and come away with 3 new private clients, or an organization would call me and ask me to go and run some workshops with them. Something always happened, and I learned from experience to trust in that. And looking back now, that was 2008, and I've been self-employed ever since. But I mapped it out the other day that typically every 4 years, I have gone through a process of feeling that frustration again, burning down what I've been doing up until then, transforming the way in which I work, and resurrecting myself into a new incarnation of my soul mission and work. And this is what the cross of the sleeping phoenix really embodies, is this ability to listen to your soul, to be guided by your intuition, to know when it's time to let go, to release, to transform, to alchemize, and to rebirth yourself once more into the next evolution, the next incarnation of your soul mission. So at this gate, I would really love to invite you to ask yourself these questions. Where am I still perhaps hiding in the illusion of safety, stability, and security of the familiar path? Or perhaps depending on external organizations or people instead of depending solely on myself, my own intuition, my own wisdom, my own soul, my own creative inspiration? Where am I perhaps feeling bored, unfulfilled, or restless? Because that's your soul signaling to you. Where am I feeling the fear and resistance to change and transformation rising in my body? Because that is a definite flag that your soul is wanting you to shift, to expand beyond the known, beyond the safe. Where are my intuition and soul signaling to me to let go, to release, to allow something to die so that I can resurrect myself once more and create the energetic space for the new to flow in complete trust and surrender? So now on to this second gate, and this second gate is the gate of intimacy and authentic connection as an autonomous individual, as opposed to an adherence to societal roles and expectations. So this gate really invites you to dismantle any barriers to intimacy and being seen as your true self so that you can cultivate authentic relationships. So as a Sagittarius free spirit and as a rebellious sleeping phoenix, I have walked this path all my life. I have refused to conform to traditional societal roles that were expected of me from a very early age. And I shared a reel recently on Instagram, and it was so interesting how this resonated with so many women. But I shared a reel about how the church says I'm too pagan, but pagans say I'm too Christian. So I walk in the shadows between both worlds, slipping unseen into churches to pray, meditating beneath Grandmother Yew in churchyards, a virgin priestess, beholden to no one and no thing but her own primal essence, soul, and spiritual path. Now, this concept of virgin comes from the ancient Greco-Romano goddess Artemis Diana, who was the virgin huntress, the virgin warrior. And I explore in my Avalon Rose Priestess training how the later mythos of the Virgin Mary is actually founded on the patriarchal appropriation and manipulation of the mythos of the virgin goddess of the hunt. And of course, the patriarchal church manipulated this concept of virgin to mean pure and sterile, obedient, humble, and held up the image of the Virgin Mary as this symbol for all women to emulate. But when we look at the real ancient true meaning of virgin, it means beholden to no one and no thing but yourself, but your true self. And so this for me is the true teaching of this gate of the sleeping phoenix. And this is very much what the mythos of Sophia-Magdalene teaches us as well. To be beholden only unto ourselves, because it's only by embodying our true self that we can actually be in intimate relationship with other and cultivate authentic connections with others. But so often we hide behind these masks, behind these veils. We hide in the roles that are expected of us, because it actually takes immense strength and courage to not conform, to say, no, that is not who I am. I will not play that role. And when I've done this, what's been very interesting is it hasn't just been the patriarchs who have resisted my rebellion and my refusal to conform and my devotion to following my true path and my soul and doing what I know is right for me. It's actually also been other women who have not yet harnessed that strength and courage within themselves, who have criticized and judged me for that. So it takes huge courage, because we risk being judged, being exiled, perhaps being ridiculed. It can be a lot safer to say in those roles to not be our true selves, because if we're rejected when we're not being our true self, then we can always blame that. We can always say, well, they rejected me because they don't actually really know who I am. But if we dare to stand in our truth, if we dare to be vulnerable, to say this is who I am, and to allow that depth of intimacy into our lives and to allow that depth of authentic connection into our lives, then we risk being rejected for who we really are. But this gate is so important because it is the gateway to the intimacy and the authentic connection that our soul actually craves. And the strength and courage to be able to be that vulnerable comes from the journey with yourself. It comes from the path of Gnosis. It comes from the path of individuation. Because once you have met all those shadow places within you, all those shadow voices and parts within you, and you have loved and forgiven them back into wholeness, then you can risk being your true self. Because when you are on the receiving end of those judgments or those rejections or experiencing being exiled, it's okay. You're still you. You still love you, all parts of you. It doesn't mean you're perfect, you're human, but you can love yourself in your imperfections. And that actually gives you a sense of fearlessness because there's nothing to lose. You've always got yourself, your relationship with your soul, with source. You are never alone. And I think that's what people fear the most, is being alone. And so they avoid intimacy. They avoid authentic connection because they're so scared of losing it. But there's nothing to fear in losing that because you will always have it within yourself. And that is the liberating aspect of this gate. So I just wanted to share some questions with you again to invite you to ask yourself in relation to this gate of intimacy. Where am I potentially adhering and conforming to societal roles that don't resonate with who I actually am? Where do I feel trapped or frustrated in a role that's no longer serving me? Where do I feel that I may be hiding, afraid to be seen in my true, authentic self, in case I'm judged, ridiculed, or exiled? Where do I feel a lack of intimacy or authentic connection in my life, due to relating in ways or perhaps with people who are not actually aligned to my true self and values? And this is where that archetype of the prostitute comes in. It's an actual prostitution of ourselves, of our values, of our true authentic self. So when we're working with this archetype of the prostitute that is embodied in Magdalene's mythos, this is where she really empowers us to work with this, to dismantle those parts of us that are in effect metaphorically prostituting ourselves. And she empowers us to come back to our true values and to find that strength and courage deep within us to live in alignment with our truth, to open our heart, to dare to be vulnerable. And that, for me, is one of the most powerful teachings of Sophia-Magdalene. So now on to the third gate of the cross of the sleeping phoenix. And this is the gate of power in motion, self-leadership, and self-sourced energy, derived from one's own independent strength, power, intuition, and energy. So this gate really invites you to release the hustle, the pushing, the trying to control, and the burnout that can result from this, and to learn how to act from a place of alignment with your unique life force energy and intuition. So this has been a huge, huge learning for me. And I'm going to be really honest, I am still working with this gate. I am an innate workaholic. I think as a manifesting generator, I just have vast amounts of energy and I have the ability to push myself way beyond the physical limitations of my body. I think it was something I had to do as a mother nursing my disabled children. I spent such a sustained period of time, like years, living on that bridge between life and death, of constantly coping with life, death, emergency situations, like literally having 2 minutes to clear my son's airway before his heart stopped and 2 more minutes before he would have died. And that was several times a day for months. So I developed a capacity to not experience stress. I think it's the only way my psyche could function. And I developed a way to cope with extreme levels of stress and multitasking and not experience it as stressful, because my perspective was so extreme. It was like, well, if I'm not resuscitating my son, then I can, deal with anything coming at me. So I would push myself and push myself and push myself until my body was the one that had to say, enough. And it's done that several times. So there was a time back in 2021, for example, when I had been single-handedly moving house as a single mother, caring for my disabled son, whilst also managing a huge launch at work. And on Lammas, on the 1st of August, the Celtic Festival of the Harvest, I was taking my dog for a walk, and it was so metaphorical, but I literally fell down a Persephone hole in a Demeter harvest field and broke my leg and couldn't walk for 6 weeks. And then even earlier this year, not having learnt my lesson, because as I said, this is a journey I'm still on, I pushed myself way too hard with the rebranding and rebuilding of my website. And it was a 5-week intense period of work. And for the last 10 days, I was only functioning on about a 4-hour sleep a night. And my entire parasympathetic nervous system crashed. And I was hospitalized and again couldn't walk for 2 weeks. So your body is very clever. Your body is going to tell you when you're pushing it too hard. And it's going to create something within your physical being that is going to force you to stop until you learn the lesson. And it's going to keep doing that until you learn that lesson. So I have been on a very, very long, deep journey with this since I was a recovering addict in my early 20s, of really having to drop into my body to even recognize that my body was there, because I was so in my mind and my soul and just pushing my body to extremes. But drop into my body and actually start to speak to my body, to honor my body, to listen to my body, to nurture my body, to nurture and listen to the rhythms and the flow of energy of my body. And when I became a mother, when I was 26, and I began my Priestess of Avalon training and began to follow the Celtic Wheel of the Year, at that point, I began to align my life to the rhythm and the cycles of Mother Nature. And then that gave me a framework in which I could keep nurturing myself on that mind, body, soul level on a daily, weekly, and seasonal basis. And this is actually what I teach in my Return to the Rose Garden monthly membership. I empower other women to align their lives to the cycles of Mother Earth and to their own bodies and soul. So this gate of the sleeping phoenix is about coming home to your body, to your own rhythm, to your own life force, your own flow of energy, and allowing that and your intuition to guide you. So not trying to force your life into these linear structures that this cross of planning that we've actually been governed by for the last 400 years, which is a very patriarchal, systemized way of structuring our lives. It really invites us to step out of those structures that are not conducive to our well-being and to align our lives to the rhythm of our own energy. And I'm especially experiencing this now going through perimenopause, because I do not have the energetic capacity that I used to have when I was younger. I can't run through walls anymore like I used to be able to. So I have to shift and adjust the way I work, the way I function, and really listen to my energy. And it's only then when I do that that I'm actually able to harness my innate power and function from that place of empowerment, of embodied presence, rather than pushing myself beyond my limits. But as I said, I'm a work in progress still with this, definitely. So some questions I'd love to invite you to ask yourself in relation to this gate of power is, where am I pushing myself too hard and potentially at risk of burning out? Where do I feel like there's an imbalance in my life? Where do I feel lacking in my own strength, power, and energy? And what would my life look like if I aligned it to the flow of my energy? And I think for me, I just want to share a little bit about my recovery from addiction. So the way in which I recovered from addiction, and it did take 2 years, I had to tackle it from a mind, body, spirit level. So I began to run in nature. And I mean, I was a heavy smoker. Like the first time I went for a run, I could only run for 5 minutes and I was gasping for breath. And I eventually built it up to about 45 minutes, but that was my max. But I started running in nature with my dog through the wildlands, through all weathers, storms, and it was the most empowering thing I've ever done. I just remember standing on top of this beacon hill in this huge storm and the rain was lashing, and I just never felt so vital and alive and powerful and strong. I also did Ashtanga yoga. I did an Egyptian belly dancing class. But I began to really nurture my well-being, green juices and eating a very kind of low glycemic diet to stabilize my blood sugar so I wasn't tempted to reach for my addictive patterns of behavior. But I also really nurtured my soul. So I started going to a friend's life drawing class in the evening. I discovered this innate passion for drawing and painting. And I was writing my historical witch burnings novel, The Serpent's Tale, at the time. So I found all these different ways to nurture myself on that mind, body, soul level. And that's how I came back into my power, into my true power, which wasn't just on a physical level of feeling very strong and fit in my body, but a really powerful level of attunement with my soul and in the expression, the creative expression of my soul in the world. So now on to the fourth and final gate of the cross of the sleeping phoenix. And this is known as the gate of the now, embodied presence, authentic expression, and aligned action from trusting your instincts in the moment. So this gate invites you to stop hiding in overthinking, in procrastination, in perfectionism. and instead to act and speak from your intuition and your embodied presence. So the key to this gate and what lies at the heart of the cross of the sleeping phoenix is trust in yourself, in your unique relationship with Source and with the unfolding of your soul's journey, which I was touching on earlier. So I've really learned this lesson in my life on a practical level through speaking and through ritual and ceremony. So I remember way back in 2007, I gave my very first inspirational talk, and it was at a theatre in front of several hundred people. And I was absolutely terrified. And the talk I gave was on my lived experience of the mental health difficulties I had struggled with, coming to terms with the abuse I had experienced as a child and my trauma recovery around that. So it was an incredibly vulnerable talk, as you can imagine. And I was still very wobbly at that time. I was in my early 30s, I guess, and I was still on a journey with my shame, with healing layers of shame around that abuse and around the ensuing mental health difficulties that I experienced. So I had my talk typed out and I stood there and I read it and I got through it, and it was incredible to realize the impact that that talk had on my service users. So many of them came up to me afterwards and said, I can't believe that you experienced that you know how I feel, that you were able to get up there and talk so vulnerably about your experiences, but seemingly with no shame. You've helped me to realize that I don't need to feel ashamed. And I realized, despite actually secretly still feeling a huge amount of shame, that there was so much power to be found in speaking vulnerably, sharing our stories, and inviting other people, other survivors, other sufferers, other women, for example, who are trying to come to terms with trauma that's happened to them, inviting them to release any shame and to recognize the depth of their courage and their strength and the power that comes through those dark nights of the soul. So since that very first talk, I have given many, many talks now. And as I grew in confidence, I began to leave the scripts at home. And I learnt how to drop into embodied presence, to quieten my ego, my left brain, logical, rational part of me that wanted to control everything, that wanted everything to be perfect, which really is a defense mechanism. And to completely empty, like literally become the empty vessel for whatever needs to move through me and to be expressed without censorship, without needing it to be perfect, in full trust that through that sharing of authentic truth, that is how we unlock the gates for other people to step through. And I've really realized even more so, the power of sharing our stories. So with the last talk I gave this summer at the Glastonbury Goddess Conference, I was sharing really vulnerably again about my story. And it was so interesting because as I was doing it, and this is after decades of therapy and having been a therapist myself for 20 years and working so deeply on so many layers and levels of fear and shame and vulnerability, as I was speaking, my throat chakra completely dried up and I literally couldn't speak and I was having to ask for water. And it was just fascinating how in the very act of daring to express my truth, to share vulnerably in the hope that my story would inspire another woman listening, that there was still another layer of shame, of resistance in my throat chakra that was trying to clear itself as I spoke. Isn't that funny? I can also hear it now. But we can't let that stop us. We cannot let those layers of shame, of vulnerability, of fear stop us from speaking our truth. Because when we dare to drop fully into embodied presence, to be that channel, to speak our truth, to allow whatever wisdom needs to be expressed through us, we literally hold the power to unlock those gateways for other women, to release their own shame, to breathe through their own fear, to alchemize their own trauma. And I had so many women come up to me after that talk this summer and say, thank you for speaking so vulnerably, so authentically. And then they would tell me their stories. And you will always experience some people responding to you in a way that you wouldn't desire them to. And that's the risk we take. You know, sometimes I'll come off stage and I'll have someone come up to me and say, oh dear, poor you. And not from a place of compassion, from a place of judging and wanting to undermine. But I've learnt that the people who do that, who respond in that way, is because they're actually threatened by the depth of strength and courage that they see in you. And so they're fixating on the wound, on the trauma, instead of honoring that strength and courage because it's so threatening for them. So I smile sweetly and I thank them and I walk on by because I know who I am, because I've walked this path of Gnosis for so many decades. I've stared into all those shadow places. I've been ground down to ashes and I've rebirthed myself like the phoenix so many times that I can now stand in my truth, harness my own power, align my life to my rhythm, be guided by my soul, my creative inspiration, my soul mission, and come back to my own unique relationship with Source, with Sophia-Magdalene, with my soul, and have that as my anchor, that as my safe harbor. And that's what ultimately gives me the strength and the courage and the power to keep alchemizing and keep resurrecting and ultimately stepping more fully into my role as a feminine leader to light the way for others, to be the torchbearer and to challenge the patriarchy. So, some final questions for you. on that gate, the gate of the now. Where am I hiding potentially in overthinking, procrastination, and perfectionism? Where do I not feel comfortable expressing my truth? Where do I feel like my ego is perhaps trying to control my authentic expression? What would it feel like to drop into full embodied presence and to allow whatever needs to be expressed through me to inspire others? So thank you so much for joining me, for watching or listening. And if you would like to come and journey with these 4 gates of this cross of the sleeping phoenix, then I am holding a 7-day activation in November. And I would love to invite you to join me. It's not a course or a training, it's a crucible where I will be activating you through my embodied presence as the sleeping phoenix to work with these 4 gates within yourself, within your own life, to really empower you through a very potent release, transformation, and resurrection journey. And I've aligned it specifically with the final 7 days of Venus, the planet Venus's visibility, before we walk into the throne room of Ereshkigal in the myth of Inanna of the underworld. So this is a very, very powerful week where we will step through that 8th and final gate of descent in the Venus cycle together to release all that no longer serves us, all illusion, all limiting thoughts, behaviors, beliefs. And then we will descend into that new moon in Scorpio portal. And within that darkness, we'll plant the seeds that our soul desires us to plant at this time. And then we're going to be working with the mirror, the shattered mirror of illusion, gathering those fragmented parts of our soul, and then rebirthing ourselves as the sun enters Sagittarius, the free spirit, the dreamer, the visionary, the philosopher. And we're going to be continuing to rise on that energy of Sagittarius, listening to the counsel of the grandmothers of Sinai, and then resurrecting ourselves on St. Catherine of Sinai's feast day, who was the patron saint of philosophers and of women. She's one of my primary deities. Her monastery lies at the foot of Mount Sinai, which is the cradle of the Rose Lineage, in which I've pilgrimaged up twice through the night to watch the dawn rise. And that's where I had this profound experience with the souls of the grandmothers in the caves there, the keepers of the mysteries. So I would love you to join me for that 7-day Sleeping Phoenix activation. It is a complete release, transformation, alchemical journey and resurrection in its own right. You can come and attend it as a standalone 7-day immersion, but it is also a taster into my 12-month Sleeping Phoenix Leadership Mastermind. I am really calling in a council of women who are ready to go to that next level in their soul mission of really harnessing the energies of the sleeping phoenix, working extensively with the 8 gates, aligned to my philosophy, a wheel of the year. It'll be beginning around the winter solstice and allowing that solar cycle to guide us through the mythological and archetypal journey of the year, helping us to really transform any limiting blocks, gain real clarity on what the next evolution of our soul mission is, and to create the sacred container of structure and stability through which we can share our gnosis, our lived embodied experience, and do that within a council of women who are resilient and brave and have their own stories of survival, their own gnosis, their own lived embodied wisdom, who are walking their paths of truth and integrity and authenticity, and who are ready to come together to empower each other to rise up even stronger, to light the way for others, to be the light, to be that light of Sophia-Magdalene in the world that the world needs now more than ever, and to rise up against the dying patriarchy and create the new earth that we all dream of. But it has to begin with the self now. We have to come home to ourselves, to our own innate power and truth, to be resourced from within. And from that place of wholeness, we can then go out in the world, knowing, trusting that whatever happens to us, whatever challenges we face, that we have that strong anchor always to come home to, that safe harbor that is our soul, that is our unique relationship with Source, that is our path of gnosis. So if you're feeling the call to come and join me in that council of women, you can sign up to the wait list for my leadership mastermind, or you can come and join me in that Sleeping Phoenix activation to just get a sense of how I work and of the energies of this specific leadership mastermind container. But for now, I'm just saying such deep gratitude to Shireen for inviting me to guest host her podcast. I absolutely adore Shireen. She's just the most incredible woman. We bond so deeply in our shared passion on women's rights and our mothering journeys, and she's such a light. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and I really hope to see you in my Sleeping Phoenix activation or mastermind. Blessed be.